Greetings and welcome to session 6. During this integrity session, I'm going to go over the practicum assessments that you'll be using with your student this week and within into next week, which is week 7. That's when they'll start the QRI. We're going to talk, to start out, we're going to talk about the guidelines for the practicum. And if you notice on Blackboard or Engage, whichever format you're using, that there is a Word document that is entitled Practicum Guidelines, I would go to that and it will look like this. And this will give you some good information on what the expectations are for your practicum. This portion of the assessment or the course can be started at any time because according to the standards that are required for the course, you do need to have 10 hours, so a minimum of 10 hours of practicum experience. So if you do need to start early, I would encourage that. Your student that you'll be working with needs to be in K through 6, and it can be anybody. It doesn't have to be a student that is currently labeled with a disability, but if you find a student that you know would really benefit from spending time with them and assessing, finding out their strengths and how to work with them and where to take them next, I would highly encourage that. So struggling readers would be great, but for this course, it can be anyone that you choose. So neighbor, family, relative, student you're currently working with. My concern with the students that if you're working with them during the school day is that you're not pulling them from their current school day to do these practicums, these hours or assessments. This is it's something that we strive for is to keep students in the classroom as much as possible, so pulling them out is not encouraged at all. The breakdown of hours, so you're going to be working the first few hours with your student and giving them these assessments that we're going to go over in a moment. I'd say maybe 2 to 3 hours if you're brand new to these assessments is about how long it will take you. Then the remaining time that you spend with your student will be focused on their needs based off your assessment results. So keep that in mind that those first hours that you do spend will be giving assessments, and then you can move on to working with them individually. So the expectations. The first thing you do, like I just mentioned, is that you're going to assess your student. After you assess your student, you're going to scan all those documents that you use and submit to Blackboard or Engage in the appropriate spot. You're going to want to analyze those results before you work with your student. So you're going to go through SCORE and analyze and notice student strengths and find out what their needs are and where you want to work with them during the rest of your practicum hours. You are going to create a parent report for week 7. The assessment for week 7 is writing a parent report with a summary. It is expected that you pass this information on to parents or teachers that would really benefit from knowing more about the student. So you're going to meet with your student for the rest of your hours, and I just want to encourage that Ellington really supports 30 to 45-minute intervention sessions to best accelerate student progress. I do understand that you are all working adults at this point in time, and for this assignment, it might trying to get in all of those hours in 30-minute sessions might be really tricky, but I would really encourage you not to go longer than an hour with your student per session because at that point, what you're doing might not be really helping with accelerating that student progress. So for each session, you're going to create a lesson plan of sorts, which is really just a brief statement about what you plan on doing and why. And so based on your assessment results, what do you plan on working with your student with? After you finish that session, you're just going to write a short reflection on how it went and then possible ideas for what you're going to work on within your next session. This lesson plan or journal will be collected at the end of the semester, so or at the end of our 8 weeks together. You You'll upload that either to your Practicum journal on Blackboard, or in Gage, you'll just attach that to the assignment for week 8. No videotaping is required, but I do want you to know that if you are having a really tricky time with your student and you want more information and you do have permission to video coach or videotape, I would be happy to coach around that learner with you if you come to that point, so please don't hesitate to ask. And then at the end here, you're going to see all of the assessments that we'll give, which we're just going to go over here now in greater detail. So the assessments, there's 7 of them total, and again, this is going to be the first few hours of your practicum. You're being exposed to informal assessments that find strengths in many areas of literacy development. So you're going to be seeing from emergent to transitional literacy skills within these assessments. And so depending on how old your student is that you're working with, you may choose to give a few of the assessments or not give them. And I'll indicate those assessments as we go along. The first assessment that you're going to be exposed to is concepts about print. We talked about this earlier on in the semester about concepts about print being a very emergent skill. Mari Clay created the observation survey, and concepts about print was one of those assessments that she felt that we really needed to look at and determine what a child knows about books. These are emergent skills, but often we overlook them because we assume that students have them under control. There's a document located on Engage and Blackboard that's attached to the assessment page that I'd like you to read through about concepts about print, and then it also has the administration instructions and the score sheet for how to administer concepts about print. Again, this is one of those very emergent skills, so if you're working with an older student and you know that they have all of this under control, you can choose not to give this assessment. If you're working with a student between K to 2nd grade, I'd highly recommend that you give this. And then also older students that may be having difficulties with reading or literacy in general. There are often holes within understandings, and we really need to use these assessments to find those holes so that we can fill them so students can continue to accelerate in their literacy learning. Concepts about print also is another assessment that a student needs to master. You can't really be 90% proficient with concepts about print. You really do need to be 100% proficient. So we do expect students to have all of these skills under control. The next assessment also comes from the observation survey from Mari Clay, and that's hearing and recording sounds. This again, there is another write-up that's located on Blackboard or Engage that you can look at and read through the instructions and how to administer the assessment. Hearing and recording sounds really gets into phonemic awareness and how students put sound to print. It's not a spelling test, so keep that in mind when you're going through the scoring options for this assessment. It is really a test to see how that student can hear the sound and put it to print. The scoring for this is also located on that sheet. So you'll also notice that you don't score 2 sounds twice within any of those assessments, and that'll be noted when you look at the reading for this assessment. Hearing and recording sounds again is another emergent assessment. So if you're working with an older student and you're pretty confident that they're not having any phonemic awareness concerns, then you can go ahead and skip this assessment. If you're working with a student K through 2, I would definitely give this assessment. And again, if you're working with a student who has, you maybe already know that they're having some difficulties with their literacy learning. These 2 assessments would be the only 2 that if you're not working, like I said, if you're not working with the concepts about print, hearing, and recording sounds, if you're not working with a young student, you don't have to give, but I would highly encourage you to practice them. So if you have a pretty willing participant as your practicum student, and hopefully you do, that and if they're older, just see if they wouldn't mind you practicing these assessments with them, because that'll give you some good practice time with how to administer the assessment. Words Their Way spelling inventory is the next one we're going to talk about. And I do have a integrity session created and located on our websites that it's titled Assessment Practicum, and it goes into the detail on how to score and more detail on Words Their Way spelling inventory. But this spelling inventory, it's like your typical spelling test, but the words get trickier as you move forward or move down, and it allows you to see what strengths the child has in spelling and understanding spelling conventions. And then based on Dr. Flynn's 3 categories or 3 stages of spelling, we have spelling by sound. This covers spelling by sound all the way to spelling by meaning. So it's really a continuum of spelling conventions and skills. There's 3 different assessment options for the Words Their Way spelling inventory, and you're going to choose which one you're going to use depending on the age of your student. Primary, elementary, and upper are the 3 options. If you choose to start with one, say elementary, based on your student's age, and decide that it was too easy, feel free to jump to upper. Or if you start to give it and you notice that the student is not really kind of falling apart throughout the assessment, then move down to primary. At the top of each assessment, there is a statement that indicates when to stop giving the assessment based on how many errors the student is making. So this spelling inventory isn't always all about spelling a word correctly, but what parts of the word can the student spell and or have under control and know. So students will get points not just for spelling the word correctly, but also for having parts of the words done correctly. When you watch the other video that I've created for this, you'll be able to see that how to score that in more detail. Word Cafe. The Word Cafe is like a word spree where you're going to spend 10 minutes having the student write as many words as they can. There's an article and administration instructions located on Blackboard and Engage. I ask that you read that first. Understand where the research is coming from. It's limited research at this point, but this kind of assessment does help give you some information about what the student knows and has under control. If the student chooses not to use or just can't or is exhausted before that entire 10 minutes is up, that is just fine. It's important to write down how much time they actually did spend writing, and then that's data for you to kind of continue to think about and grow with that student as they, again, continue to grow in their own literacy learning. So you'll score the spree based on the instructions in the article. This spree looks at not only how a student spelled words and what words they have under control, but how many syllables they have within each word, and they'll talk about that in the article on how to score that. The next assessment you'll be giving is it's more just an observation. It's the student oral language observation matrix. And this one is meant for you to observe the student at least 3 times in different settings and different times of the day. And then the matrix allows you to choose, depending on that, more like a rubric style about where that student would fall within each oral language category. For the practicum, I understand that you may not know this student at all and not have a lot of time to observe that student. So do your best to make those observations within the time that you are assessing, and then to just do your best in making the decision on where they would fall within the matrix. It is something that I want you to have exposure to, because oral language is very much a part of literacy, and I want you to be exposed to how that fits in with the whole child. So it is an opportunity to use this, but it might not be in a completely way as far like in a totally using fidelity throughout the whole assessment with this, because we just don't have the time within our practicum time to really observe the student. If you do, I highly encourage you to take that opportunity. The final assessment that you're going to do for week 6 is the 10-minute writing prompt. And this assessment is, well, before I get into the assessment, I do want to talk a little bit about how important it is to build that rapport with your student. So before you even start working with your student, it'd be really good for you to just sit down and talk to them a little bit, get to know them, maybe their hobbies, what they like to do, what do they like about school, what are they reading, are they reading, things like that. Get to know your child. And then based on that, this is where you can pull some of that information and provide them with a prompt to write about for 10 minutes. So you do want to provide them with something that would be of interest to them. So, after getting to know them, having them write more on a hobby that they're really interested in, or a great vacation they took, or something that just is something that they're actually going to be able to write about. So after you give them 10 minutes to write, again, this is where I would, if they don't write the entire 10 minutes, do go ahead and just note how long they did write. This is something to note, thinking about endurance, ideas that they can actually think of to create their writing. So it is all data for us. So don't continue to push really hard. Do try to get them to write as much as they can, but if they're starting to fall apart, go ahead and let them finish up before the 10 minutes is up. Once they have completed this, you're going to use the 6 traits rubric to determine the strengths of the child that they have. So you're going to use that rubric, which is also located on Blackboard and Engage, and determine, after reading their prompt or their writing, where they would fall within each of those 6 areas. The 6 traits is a very common rubric that's used throughout the United States in many schools. It's very popular, so it does cover quite a bit of what we would expect to see within writing. However, it's kind of a trickier writing rubric to use for younger students whose stories and writing may not be, full paragraphs and really beginning, middle, and end kind of ideas. So if your student is in K through 2, I would highly encourage you to use the continuum of literacy learning and determine where your students' strengths are based on the grade level that they're in. So the continuum of the writing portion of that will really help you determine the student's strengths and needs. You can also do that, use the continuum with older students, and that's encouraged as well. So those are the 6 assessments that are being introduced to, the informal assessments that you're being introduced to in session 6. Session 7, you're going to be introduced to informal reading inventory, and that's the QRI, which is the other text that you have for this course. The QRI is one of many informal reading inventories that are out there and that your schools might be using. The text that you have for the QRI will cover, it's an assessment protocol that covers pre-K all the way to high school. So it's all wrapped in one book and is a valuable resource, especially for special ed teachers who are trying to do progress monitoring and getting information for their present levels of IEPs. Using the QRI can give you a lot of information and then note that progress. So, and it's just kind of handy because it's all in one little book. Like I said, there's many that your schools might be using, the DRA, the BATS, the Stieglitz. Again, these are all informal reading inventories, and they all are created to help you determine appropriate text levels for students. So what you're going to hear a lot about is independent, instructional, and hard or frustration. And these are levels of text that if a student is reading independently, or the text level is independent, it means they don't need any scaffolding or instruction within that text level. Instructional is a great place to do your guided reading groups. Really, when you're working and you're able to scaffold the child in their learning, that's where you want the level of the student to be at. And then hard or frustration is where that student isn't going to grow. We're going to kind of put them in that fight or flight and form in their brain, and they're not going to really attend a text well, and often shut down. It's not really, and it's good to know where that level is, but it's not really where we want our students to be reading. Of course, there's a lot more that goes into what students read depending on topics and interest and genres, so do keep that in mind. So these are really just baselines for you to get started with your children that you're working with. And then also to pull out information, more detailed information on what the student has under control. So usually informal reading inventories are going to include word lists to determine starting points, an oral reading passage, and then comprehension questions, written or oral. The QRI are just oral questions that you're going to ask, and there's also a recall portion. During the oral reading passage part of the reading, you're often going to find words per minute, rate, and fluency within that, or an accuracy, I should have said, instead of rate, because rate is included within fluency. So, that's words per minute too. But anyway, so you're going to get fluency and words per minute within that oral reading passage. The comprehension portion of an inventory is going to be usually questions. The QRI uses explicit and implicit questions, so questions that can be found right there within the text and questions that they're going to have to dig a little deeper into responding to. Often we can find out where they are functioning within, beyond, and about within our wheel of strategic actions by asking these comprehension questions. Some inventories have written options, and some have oral options, and some have both. So it just depends on what systems you're using. The QRI is just an oral option where right after you have them read their passage, and you're going to ask them these questions. After the recall portion, you're going to ask them these questions. Week 7 is you're going to be introduced to the QRI, and you'll be reading portions of it and using the DVD to help with administration. So you'll learn a lot more about how to use the QRI specifically during week 7. So the assessment for session 6. Now that we've kind of talked about all of the assessments you're going to be given, your assignment for this week, after you've done all the other portions of the week within Blackboard or Engage, you're going to summarize the important elements of knowledge and skill in assessment. You're going to choose one primary grade, so 1 to 3, and one intermediate grade, 4 to 6, and develop a plan for each grade using formal and informal tools to assess your students' literacy development. You can see the standards that for this course that are here below, and you need to make sure that you address each of the 5 areas with formal and informal tools. Dr. Flynn in her integrity sessions gets into formal tools and in some of the other materials that you'll be reading this week that will help guide your understanding for how to include those formal tools as well as informal tools. And what would that plan be, that plan for each grade level that you choose? Again, one primary, one intermediate, and why you would be choosing those assessments for each of those areas. That will be due at the end of this week, and is often a paper. If you're someone who needs maybe guidelines, I'd guess 3 to 6 pages would be the paper. If you choose to do a presentation, you can do again, you do have the choice. It doesn't have to be a paper on how you choose to present this information. Just make sure you include all the components of the assessment. So that is the Practicum assessment session for week 6, dipping a little bit into week 7. And as always, if you have questions, feel free to email me at any time. Thanks.